Most people think Artemis 3 is almost ready. The rocket exists, Orion already flew around the moon, the astronauts are training, but that picture is incomplete, because Artemis 3 does not depend on the spacecraft working. It depends on multiple systems that still have not been fully proven together. The real challenge is no longer reaching the moon, it is getting multiple independent systems to work together in sequence. From the outside, Artemis can look straightforward. NASA launches astronauts aboard the Space Launch System rocket. Orion carries them toward the moon. A lander takes them to the surface. Then the crew returns home. Simple. But that simplicity only exists at the top level. Underneath it is a much more complicated architecture involving different companies, different spacecraft, different launch schedules, and systems that are still being developed at the same time. And this is where the illusion of readiness begins. NASA's Space Launch System already flew successfully during Artemis 1. Orion traveled around the moon and safely returned to Earth. Those were major milestones. They proved that some core systems work in space. The astronauts for the Artemis missions have already been selected and are in training. Launch hardware exists, ground systems exist, mission planning exists. So naturally, people assume the mission itself is close. But Artemis 3 is not only a NASA mission anymore. It is also deeply dependent on systems outside NASA's direct control, and most of the hardest parts of the mission still sit inside those external systems. The biggest example is the lunar lander. NASA is not building the Artemis 3 lander itself. SpaceX is building it through the Human Landing System program. And that changes how the mission works. Instead of one tightly integrated spacecraft carrying astronauts from Earth to the lunar surface and back, Artemis 3 splits the mission into multiple layers. NASA launches Orion, SpaceX launches Starship, then those systems must connect together in space. And this is where the mission starts becoming fragile, because Artemis 3 does not fail gradually. If one major system does not work, the mission stops completely. The mission chain begins with launch. Orion launches aboard SLS, but separately, SpaceX must launch the Starship Human Landing System into orbit. That alone is not enough. Starship cannot travel directly to the moon fully fueled from a single launch. The spacecraft is too large and requires more propellant than one rocket can carry at liftoff. So, SpaceX plans to solve this using orbital refueling. This is one of the most important parts of the entire architecture. Multiple tanker starships launch from Earth one after another. They dock together in orbit above Earth and transfer fuel into the lunar lander version of Starship. Visually, the mission starts to look very different from Apollo. Instead of one rocket heading to the moon, Artemis 3 depends on multiple launches feeding propellant into one spacecraft in orbit. But this creates another problem. Orbital refueling at this scale has not yet been operationally demonstrated. Fuel transfer between spacecraft has happened before in limited forms, but Artemis depends on something much larger. Large-scale cryogenic propellant transfer between giant spacecraft repeatedly in orbit while maintaining stable conditions long enough for lunar operations. That system still needs to be proven, and if refueling fails, the lander never reaches the moon. But even if refueling succeeds, the next layer begins. Starship must perform translunar injection and travel toward lunar orbit. Orion must also arrive in the correct orbit at the correct time. Then the two spacecraft need to dock together. Docking itself is not new. Spacecraft have docked in orbit for decades, but Artemis creates a new integration problem because these systems were developed separately and operate very differently. Orion is a NASA-led spacecraft built for deep space crew transport. Starship is a fully reusable vehicle still undergoing rapid testing and redesign cycles. Now those systems must work together as one operational architecture. And this is where integration risk appears, because systems often fail during integration, not during isolated testing. Individually, components may function correctly, but when multiple systems interact under real mission conditions, new problems appear between them. Communication timing changes. Software interactions change. Operational procedures become more complicated. The uncertainty now exists between systems, and that is the real architectural shift inside Artemis 3. The uncertainty is no longer located inside one spacecraft. It lives between systems, between launches, between schedules, between organizations. Artemis 3 depends on those system interactions working correctly the first time. If docking fails, the mission stops. Then comes the lunar descent itself. This is another major dependency layer. The Starship Human Landing System is much larger than previous lunar landers. NASA's own oversight discussions have repeatedly highlighted the operational implications of this design, including landing geometry, surface access, and dependency on systems like the crew elevator. The vehicle must descend safely onto the lunar surface, operate there, support astronauts, and then launch again for return to orbit. But the complete end-to-end sequence has not yet been demonstrated under crew representative conditions. And that distinction matters, because proving one isolated capability is not the same as proving the entire operational chain. A successful launch is not the same as a successful lunar landing. A successful docking test is not the same as a full crewed mission sequence. A successful engine firing is not the same as sustained lunar operations. Artemis 3 requires all of those things to work together continuously. And this creates another pressure point: timing. Apollo missions operated with far fewer moving parts. Artemis depends on synchronization between multiple spacecraft, multiple launches, and multiple organizations. If one system slips, the schedule moves with it. If one tanker launch is delayed, refueling shifts. If refueling shifts, lunar departure timing shifts. If vehicle readiness changes, crew schedules change. Everything becomes connected. And because some of these systems are still being developed in parallel, delays can cascade through the architecture very quickly. This is why Artemis 3 feels close and fragile at the same time. Parts of the mission are mature, other parts are still evolving, and the mission only succeeds if all of them align operationally. Here's the catch: many of these systems are being tested separately. SLS has flown, Orion has flown, Starship continues flight testing, but the complete mission sequence itself has not yet been fully validated together. That gap matters because integration creates new failure points. A spacecraft can work correctly by itself and still encounter problems when interacting with another spacecraft. A docking system can work during one mission profile but behave differently under another. Operational complexity increases when timing, fueling, communications, navigation, and crew procedures all connect together in one chain. And Artemis 3 is fundamentally an integration-heavy mission. This is where the architecture changes again. The challenge is no longer simply building one spacecraft capable of reaching the moon. The challenge is coordinating multiple independent systems into one functioning mission architecture. Different contractors, different technologies, different testing schedules, different operational assumptions. Now, all of them must function together without major interruption. And because Artemis depends on sequence, not just capability, one interruption can stop the mission entirely. If refueling fails, the mission stops. If docking fails, the mission stops. If the lander is delayed, the mission stops. The architecture does not absorb failure gradually. It pauses completely until the missing layer works. Now, if you want to understand how these missions actually work, not just what gets announced, subscribe to SpaceWatch. Because what matters is not only the mission itself, it is the system behind it. That exact system is what Artemis 3 is really testing. From a distance, Artemis can look like a return to Apollo, astronauts returning to the moon, lunar landings, deep space exploration. But underneath, the architecture is completely different. Apollo concentrated capability into one tightly integrated government-built stack, one program, one chain of command, one tightly controlled mission architecture. Artemis distributes capability across multiple systems and multiple organizations. That approach has advantages. It allows reusable systems, commercial participation, and larger long-term infrastructure potential. But it also creates architectural dependency, and that is the real challenge. The uncertainty is no longer inside a single spacecraft waiting to be fixed. It exists in the connections between systems that must all succeed together. So the real question is not whether Artemis 3 is close. Parts of it clearly are. The real question is how much of this full mission chain is actually validated before astronauts depend on it.